Hi, Kit Kats, Hannibal, Bobanable, Fee-Fi, Fulfanable, history's most Rome-hating manimal. Good news, you guys, we talking about some Hannibal. Historic rivals are a normal thing, and there are lots to look at, like Turkey and Greece, England and France, England and Scotland, England and Ireland, England and the world, actually, America and childhood diabetes. But today, we are looking at the rare case of an entire country being the most bitter of rivals with just one dude. Now we know how the course of history ultimately flowed, but what you might not realize is how close the fight between one of the greatest empires in history and one guy with a lot of salt really was. Hannibal Barca was born destined to clash with Rome in some way. He was the son of Hamilcar, a Carthaginian general who fought against Rome in the First Punic War. Hannibal was only 5 or 6 years old when Carthage surrendered to Rome. If only they had waited a few years for this madman to grow up, things would have likely gone a lot differently. Hamilcar didn't just give up after the First Punic War, though. He kept on working to strengthen Carthage and his family's political position, and in a few years raised a new army and marched it to Iberia. At the time, Hannibal was only 9 years old and started to figure this is old enough to start fighting the Red Menace. Hannibal begged his dad to go with him to conquer Iberia, and his dad was like, okay, but swear to me that Rome sucks. Rome sucks? Okay, now like you really mean it. After swearing that he'd, and this is the actual quote, never be a friend of Rome, which, all things considered, is some pretty modest wording for where this story is going, Hannibal went on a father-son murdering spree, which came as a big surprise to the locals who never expected the Spanish Carthaginians. When Hannibal was 18, he lost a competition with his dad to see who could hold their breath the longest, and fun fact, Hamilcar is still the running champ of breath holding to this day, still hasn't come up for air. So Hannibal's brother-in-law, Hasdrubal, took over command of the army, and Hannibal continued working as a commander under him until Hasdrubal found a conveniently placed knife in his back. Hey, who put that there? And Hannibal became commander-in-chief of the big bad Carthaginian army at 26. And to think at 26, my greatest career accomplishment was getting a raise from $8 an hour to $8.25 an hour, making the big boy money now. Rome might have been a little worried at this point because even a contemporary Roman scholar named Livy, which, by the way, just super cute name, was writing about how the Carthaginians were super happy to have Hannibal commanding them because he seemed as skilled a commander as his father while still being relatively young for a commander. For the next few years, Hannibal seemed happy to keep on plundering and battling around Iberia. At this point, it seemed the dynamic between Rome and Carthage was, you leave me alone, I leave you alone. But Rome was clearly starting to get really scared of this really successful general smashing up all the locals in Iberia. So they allied with the southern Iberian city-state. This was a big deal because years before Hasdrubal had made a standing agreement with Rome. You get north, I get south. K. Two of those max. And Hannibal viewed this as a breach of the standing agreement, and so bad times are to ensue for Rome. Hannibal immediately went to roll straight to that city-state that had allied Rome and sent all the spoils back off home to Carthage. He knew exactly what he's doing. Gaining support at home, it is time for the Punic War, Part 2, Electric Romaboo. The Roman Senate, when hearing of Hannibal's ballsy move, acted immediately and sent a letter to the Carthaginian Senate. Are you for real? For real, for real. Carthage did prove that they have strong, toxic girlfriend energy though, because after the Romans knew that they were hella serious about the whole screw off out of Iberia thing, the Romans asked if they wanted to do some war, to which the Carthaginians legitimately responded, I don't know, what do you want to do? So Rome, as Rome was off to do, chose the war option. Hannibal finally got what he wanted and started wrecking face in Italy. Oh, and did I mention with elephants? It's not a big deal until you think about the whole giant mountain range between the rest of Europe and Italy. No idea how Hannibal managed that. Just hella respect, though. So we all know how it went. Hannibal just beat up the Romans in Italy year after year. Roman kids couldn't sleep. Everyone was having nightmares about that scary Hannibal guy. But since he couldn't get reinforcements or supply his army, and any commanders he sent out with smaller groups of soldiers just were not as competent as Hannibal, they just weren't able to accomplish anything. After years of fighting, he just couldn't sustain it and had to return home to North Africa. Here, he met, surprise, surprise, another Roman army. He met with their commander, Scipio, spoilers, before the battle to discuss peace. Now, both of these guys were at this point just the biggest of deals, and they supposedly did spend some time in absolute awe of each other and just stroking each other's egos. But when Scipio started to imply that it was Carthage's fault for not following the rules Rome placed on Carthage after the Punic War, Hannibal was having none of this cow poopies, and thus the Battle of Zama did done happen. Hannibal, at this point, was aging. He was tired from his long Italian campaign. Allies providing Carthage with cavalry betrayed Carthage to join the Romans, and Scipio used trumpets to scare the war elephants of the Carthaginian army into routing over the Carthaginian infantry. It took all the stars to align, but Hannibal was finally defeated. Until now, he had been seen as invincible. This was his first major defeat. This is where most stories of Hannibal end, but he didn't die here. He would not be a friend of Rome. And powered by hate, the man continued. After Zama, Carthage did surrender because, what are you going to do when Hannibal of all people lost? He was only 46 at the time, so he attempted a political career to rebuild Carthage. As a competent man, the first thing he suggested the government do was eliminate corruption and tax the rich. You big dummy. So with the government of Carthage actually functioning under the competent leadership of Hannibal, he made two big enemies, the rich and politically powerful of Carthage. Rome wasn't happy with Carthage doing good, so they teamed up with all those rich and powerful Carthaginians to get rid of Hannibal. But before the Romans could get to him, he saw the writing in the sand and he ran off to the Seleucids, one of those post-Alexander kingdoms who also weren't big fans of the whole Rome thing. After hanging around for about 10 years begging for an army from the Seleucids, they finally told him, if you go build yourself a navy, you can have the navy, which I guess is something. So, navy built, which he promptly sailed off to go fight the Romans and their Rhodesian allies. He did okay with his limited forces, but the Romans were clearly going to defeat the Seleucids before Hannibal could do much of anything at this point. The Romans, they were feeling a little bit pissy about this whole Hannibal situation at this point, so their peace deal was pretty much entirely, alright, just give us Hannibal so we can peace. Hannibal knew that the Romans were going to come after him though, so when he saw that the Seleucids were losing, he preemptively fled to Crete before eventually ending up serving the king of Bithynia. Bithybith. He went to the king of Bithybith just because they too did not like the Rome guys. So Hannibal spent a few years throwing snakes at Rome's allies with the Bithybith boys. Eventually, Rome came to the aid of their allies, and it was definitely because they were allied and not because they heard the name Hannibal and suddenly cared a whole lot more. When the entire Roman army showed up, the king of Bithybith was suddenly super chill with the Romans, probably on account of his entire castle being surrounded by a bunch of soldiers that were not going to leave without Hannibal for super-duper sure this time. The king immediately agreed to turn over Hannibal, but when Hannibal saw all the soldiers outside the castle, he decided it would be super dope to just troll the Romans one last time. He drank some poison and left a note.